In this video, we're going to go ahead and just pick up right where we left off in the last video. We're going to be spending some time over in IAM, and that's going to help us learn more about security. We're going to have to make sure that our Lambda function has permissions to address the S3 bucket that we created. So let's go ahead and jump in there and get started from where the last video left off. Or in this case, we want to scroll down on Lambda to see which role we're using. In this case, S3POC-role- and a bunch of letters and numbers. It creates these to make sure that you have a unique name. Now there's a couple of different ways. You could navigate over to IAM just like normal, which is what we did earlier, or you can actually click on this, and I'm going to hold down the control key so that it opens up in a separate tab, and then it takes me straight to this role. So let's take a look at this role. It has a policy that was automatically created, and if we look at it, we'll find that there is a JSON object in here which represents the security permissions that are allowed or disallowed by it and which resources it's allowed to see. However, this is a very difficult way to understand security at first and is very powerful, but we don't want to jump into this right now. So we'll be looking at things like the policy summary and using the policy builder to create our policies for the time being. In the last video, we created a security problem. So now we're going to solve it. So let's start by going ahead and untoggling our full screen, going up to the top, go to services, and let's go over to IAM. Now, I often find it useful to keep multiple AWS services open at the same time. S3 is open so I could get the bucket name. IAM is open so that I can adjust my security. And Lambda is open so that I can write some code in my function. So while the automatic creation of our role and the policies around it was convenient for getting a quick start, I don't really like this because it has weird names, and in a larger system this will become unwieldy at a certain point. So I'm going to create a brand new policy and a brand new role to take care of this function. Let's go ahead and start by creating our policy and then creating our role where we will attach the policy. So we'll click on policies, and I'm going to go ahead and click Create Policy. And in this particular case, we want to create a policy using the visual editor and not the JSON editor. Again, the JSON editor is very powerful, but it's a difficult way to start understanding security in AWS. So we'll stick to the visual editor for the majority of this course. Under service, you control which service is affected by this policy, and you can affect multiple services in the same policy. In this case, I want to make sure that they have access to CloudWatch. So I will add CloudWatch logs to this specific policy. Next, we need to specify which actions we're going to allow. So in this particular case, I just want to allow all actions in there, which will allow it to list, read, and write to them. Now, we immediately get a warning that says we haven't identified which resources are allowed to be modified. So in this case, I want to allow the ability for this method, or in this case, policy, to affect the S3 POC CloudWatch logs. So let's go ahead and drop down resources here, and we will go ahead and click and add AR in to restrict access. So by default, if we didn't do anything here, we would have access to all logs with the permissions that we just added, and that might be desirable. For instance, if we were creating one policy to manage multiple functions, and a lot of those functions had a lot of similar security needs, it might be more preferential to create a single policy to assign to all of those functions. CloudWatch logs have two types of resources that we're concerned with. The first one is log group. This is specific to a function and does not change in between versions. Log stream is specific to the version of the function that you just created and will change when you update the code. This will allow you to keep logs from different sets of code separately so that you do not make inaccurate assessments about what might be going on with a particular version of a function. CloudWatch resources are separated into two types of resources. First, log groups. These are specific to each function. For instance, S3 has its own log group and Hello World has its own log group. This helps organize the logs into two distinct functional areas. Underneath each of those log groups is the log stream. Each log stream is specific to a version of the function. So every time you update the code and click save, a new log stream will be created. This allows us to keep our functional versions separate in regards to logging so that you don't make a mistake in assessing what might or might not have happened in a particular version of the code. So now let's specify which log group we want to give it access to by clicking Add ARN. An ARN is an identifier that Amazon uses to identify everything in AWS. They're very long and look very complicated. However, overall they're very simple, and oftentimes the AWS console will give you builders like this, and if you need them, most of the time you can just go and copy and paste it. In the case of CloudWatch, this isn't actually an easy one to get a hold of, so they give us this nice little builder. So the very first thing I'm going to do is identify which region we want to work in. And in this case, we're going to work in US-West-1. Oops, type that all in caps. Let's do that again. US-West-1. The account number, which I'm just put into my clipboards for ease. However, you can get this by going up here and clicking on My Account if you don't know what your account number is. And the log group we want to give them access to is going to have a funny name itself. So let's go ahead and get that directly from CloudWatch. Again, I want you to know where these resources are. I know what it is, but it's much easier if we go and start learning where everything is. So in this case, I want to open up a new tab, and we'll go to AWS. We'll hit our sign into console button here. It'll go ahead and drop us straight in, and we will go over to CloudWatch. Once we're in CloudWatch, we can go down here to logs, and we'll see our two logs. So notice the log group names here are named after our functions. However, they have /AWS and /Lambda ahead of them. In this case, the CloudWatch console doesn't really provide us with the ARN that we need. So in this case, they give us a little builder to help us make it easier to go ahead and get the information we need. So US East 1 is the region that we're working in. I'm sorry, US West 1 is the region that we're working in. And we know that because, well, I just happen to know that in this case. But if you didn't know that, we're working in the Northern California region right now, and you would need to go to Google and do a search to get into the AWS documentation to figure out what the region identifier you have is. US East 1 is a different one, US East 2 is another one. There's lots of them. Make sure you get this right, because otherwise this won't work. Next up, we need to have the account number for our account. The easiest place to find this is in our account information. So I'm going to open up another tab here. Tabs are definitely your friend when you're working in AWS. And I'm going to go to my account information here. And I'm going to copy our account ID. Just go ahead and close this. Close this now since we're done. And we'll paste it into this account information. Last, we need the log group name to put into our builder so that it can build out our ARN for us. So for this, I happen to already have the CloudWatch Management Console open. And if I were to have come here fresh for the first time, this is the page I would have come into, and we'd want to click down here on logs, and this will show us all of our log groups. In this case we have two, one for each function that we've created, hello world and S3 POC. In our case, we're more interested in the S3 POC since that's the function we're working on right now. And notice that there's a bunch of log streams in here. These are from previous runs that we did of our function. I'm going to use this up here to copy over the last part of information we need, which is the log group name. And then I'm going to go ahead and click Add. Once I've added this, I could lock down which streams it has access to, but in this case we want it to be able to create new ones and keep going and going and going. So we'll give it access to any of the log streams that are part of this log group. Now, real quick, I want to pop open the JSON and show you that it's written a whole bunch of stuff for us. We are still not going to go into this. However, I just want you to know that it's doing a lot of work for you behind the scenes and that you can rely on this to write some rather complicated stuff for you. So we'll go ahead and move to the last step, which is to review the policy, where it will actually tell us what we've given access to. So we have given full access to multiple resources. And if we wanted to click on this a little bit further, we could actually see the exact breakdown of all of the different things that we can do. I'm happy with this, so we're going to give this policy a name. In our case, we'll call it S3 POC execution role. I'm sorry, policy. We'll be creating the role next. This policy is used for last, click Create Policy. And congratulations, you've manually created your first policy in IAM. Last, we need to attach this policy to a role for it to be useful for us inside of the Lambda management. So we'll click on roles here, and you'll notice that there's a whole bunch of stuff in here already. And I'm going to go ahead and clean up the old one that we had in here just so that we don't get it confused. And I'm going to delete this role. And then I'm going to click Create Role. As we saw earlier when we went over IAM for the first time, there's many different types of roles. In this case, we want the type of role that will allow one service to talk to another service and assign the permissions in between those. This is very common for EC2 and Lambda. In fact, so common that they've put it right up at the top. So we'll go ahead and click on Lambda, and then we'll move to our next into our permissions. And now it's going to ask us to attach the policy that we want. So if, for instance, we attached administrator policy here, we could do anything we wanted with our Lambda function. However, that's not very secure, because if we make a mistake, we could also delete a lot of critical resources inside of AWS. That's why we created our policy. So I'll go ahead and search for our policy by just simply typing S3, and we'll see very quickly that our policy is right down here at the bottom. Let's go ahead and check it and move to the next step. I don't have any tags that I want to add, so I'm going to click onto the next step to review it. And then it's going to ask me for a role name. In this case, I'm going to call it the S3 POC execution role. And we'll go ahead and click Create Role. And now notice that we have our S3 execution role. In this case, the bug that we have is that we did not assign a body to our call. This is a very simple thing to fix. We will simply pass the body, and we will pass event.sentence. Event is the object that is passed into our export handler, and sentence is part of the JSON object that will be passed into our function. So any parameter that is passed to this Lambda function will come in via the event object. And we can see that in our logging here. Notice that the sentence is, "Hello there, my name is Greg, and I like sushi." So in here, event.sentence will return that string for me. So let's go ahead and save this one last time, give it one more test, and we'll notice our file name should be starting with 15B. So let's go back to our S3 management console. Let's go ahead and refresh, and we'll see 15B here, and we'll notice that the size is not 0. If we wanted to take it a step further, we could actually open this up and download it. So next we'll go over to S3 and take a look inside of our bucket, and there it is. There's our file. However, notice that the size is 0. That's very odd. It didn't hold our sentence. And that's because we found yet another bug in our code. However, we did get further this time. So let's go solve our last bug for this video. In this case, the bug that we have is that we did not assign a body to our call. This is a very simple thing to fix. We will simply pass the body, and we will pass event.sentence. Event is the object that is passed into our export handler, and sentence is part of the JSON object that will be passed into our function. So any parameter that is passed to this Lambda function will come in via the event object. And we can see that in our logging here. Notice that the sentence is, "Hello there, my name is Greg, and I like sushi." So in here, event.sentence will return that string for me. So let's go ahead and save this one last time, give it one more test, and we'll notice our file name should be starting with 15B. So let's go back to our S3 management console. Let's go ahead and refresh, and we'll see 15B here, and we'll notice that the size is not 0. If we wanted to take it a step further, we could actually open this up and download it. These are the problems that will happen in real-world development. Sometimes when you've solved one problem, you've left another one unsolved. It doesn't mean you haven't made progress forward, it just means you haven't made enough progress forward to get to the next iteration of your project. So in our case, what happened here is we forgot our S3 credentials in our policy. So let's go ahead and add those in now. Let's go back to IAM, and let's go back to our policies, and let's go back to S3, and then into our S3 POC execution policy. And then in here, we want to edit the policy, and we are going to add additional permissions in here. Before, we talked that you could have access to multiple sections of AWS. Here, we're going to give access to not only the CloudWatch logs, but we're going to add the additional permission to access S3, and specifically, we're only going to provide the put object permission for them to access. This is the only method we're calling, so therefore the only method we need access to. Giving ourselves additional access would just be opening up the security for problems later. So there you have it, our first full trip all the way through a new serverless system, Amazon's S3. We also got a chance to dive deep into IAM and really configure some security. That security we made sure was limited enough in scope so that the application couldn't accidentally cause any damage where we didn't really want it to. This is just important in security conscious organizations and something that you should do. This will also wrap up Chapter 4. We really wanted to get in and create our first complicated POC that we use other services with. From here on out, we'll be writing POCs at a pretty regular pace.